Hi there, thanks very much for coming by. This is a really interesting article. I'm going to post a link to it in the description below because it's really worth a read. Um, Drawing a parallel between cults and terrorism, what we can learn from cults and apply to terrorism. Can we establish parallels, she's put, between noxious belief systems? But the cult she's chosen to look at is Jehovah's Witnesses. Can insights and lessons about human behavioral trends and group psychologies from cults help us understand and thereby reduce risks of terrorism today? So she does, she's very thorough, says that Christianity itself was once considered deviant. Fair enough. She quotes Joe Rogan. I think is he the one who's an ex-witness? He made the following joke: the difference between a cult and a religion. A cult is led by a guy who knows it's bullshit. In a religion, that guy is dead. So she goes into what a cult is really thoroughly. As I say, please have a look at it yourself. I won't go into it all because there's a lot here. She brings up Stephen Hassan, Robert Lifton, the book Thought Reform and Psychology of Totalism, a study of brainwashing in China, the 8 levels cult dynamics that he put: milieu control, mystical manipulation, demand for purity, confession, sacred science, loading the language, doctrine over person, dispensing of existence. She talks about Jehovah's Witnesses. Are they extremist? But and she says, okay, they don't go to war, but does a group, have a look there, does a group need to be explicitly violent, she says, or even cult-like at all, to have any of its dynamics questioned or legally obstructed? And then using those 8 headings, she actually goes into them with Jehovah's Witnesses. So we've got the milieu, being taken out and away from your family and friends, mystical thinking, the loaded language, purity, the confession of sins. It's that policing of everyone else, Oh, I saw someone walk into, or about the control there. Members are often questioned, she says, whether, if the organisation told them to, they would wake up every morning at 3 o'clock and jump around. They are exhorted to do so without questioning the motive, as God always has a purpose that is often hidden or incomprehensible to us. She's talking about the prophecies that failed to come to light and the new light. She's really thorough on it. And she's obviously been looking at videos and things from what she refers to. The doctrine supersedes individual experience. That's all down there. No salvation outside the cult. Does such a message leave room for people to adhere to the cult for any reason other than sheer terror? Are children immune from judgment? Well, we're told they're not. If so, are they allowed to mourn as orphans the death of their sinful parents? Psychological effects of cult involvement. If all this has not been sufficient to warrant skepticism regarding the perceived innocence, what is to be said of practices that result in suicide or death by willful negligence in the name of religious belief? The practice of shunning, in which members shun, disavow, or cut off contact from other members who have gone astray, can potentially lead to devastating consequences. In dramatized instructional video produced by the governing body and released by several YouTube users in an attempt to expose this harmful practice, a young adult woman is shown to suffer the consequences of her sinful behavior. Her natural desire for a male companion leads her into temptation, and she is shunned by her parents who, following the biblical example of Aaron, whose rebellious sons were killed by God and whom God told not to mourn their deaths, refuse to answer phone calls from their lonely, depressed daughter who, as the narrator tells us, just wanted to hear their voices. Does the punishment really fit the crime? A quick Google search reveals how this practice has led to the suicide of countless victims, who, feeling worthless, abandoned, and guilt-ridden, have preferred to take their own lives rather than live with the shame of having disappointed God, their family, and the only friends they know. In an online petition over 6,000 persons signed, there was an appeal to launch an investigation as to whether Jehovah's Witnesses can be held at all accountable for their practices, and whether they have the right to use mental coercion to force members not to leave. However, the abuse does not end here, and then they're talking about blood transfusion causing deaths of adults and children. This biblical verses, I should say. Manon Boyer, aunt of Eloise Dupree, who's been a sad and terrible case of late, a young woman who refused a blood transfusion after giving birth and died of a hemorrhage, says that the practice amounts to an honor killing. That's a good point. The victim's relative contends that she was not in a position to give informed consent and might have been under undue influence from the Jehovah's Witness Hospital Liaison Committee, who made sure the doctrine was upheld. For the interested reader, this link also provides a harrowing, close examination of the manipulative language used in the organization's literature to praise the needless sacrifice of lives in upholding a doctrine that has no convincing biblical basis, let alone moral justification. And then they quote, would a Christian break God's law just to stay alive a little longer in this system of things? Getting near the end. Common threads. By now it might be reasonable to assume that the reader has either subconsciously or consciously made the connection between this group and another toxic strain of religion that has permeated within society, with political reach, wider audience, and higher fatalities that extend even to non-believers. It is primarily this last point that distinguishes cults from terrorist groups, but is the underlying driving mentality any different? And what are groups that do not engage directly in terrorism, but that fuel the ideology that leads to it? So, paralleling there. Cults and terrorism, is there a connection? Extremist thinking is not the exclusive domain of terrorists, but terrorists are fueled by extremist thinking. Dr. Arthur Doerr is a new name to me, professor in psychology and member of the International Cultic Studies Association Board of Directors, studies the connection between cult mentality and terrorism using the group psychological abuse scale. Ooh. To determine how closely different entities, including Al-Qaeda and Heaven's Gate, for example, conform to the approach employed by high control groups. He acknowledges that terrorists target non-combatants while cults direct their hostility against members or ex-members. Hello? Oh, dear, 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 dear. Oh, talking about love, bombing, sense of purpose, superiority. That's about other things, but other people, but very familiar. So there we go. What then are the degrees of distance separating a Christian denomination and a group that only takes things a step further in enacting God's apocalyptic end goal for him? What would it take for one to cross over into the next? How much difference is there really in believing it is just to kill another human being and believing it is just that God does so? Does mind control only exist in the realm of science fiction? Many groups make use of it with impunity. So, extreme thinking is religion in of itself, and it should never be above questioning, much less respected. So, fascinating. Link below to look at the whole thing. Hope that you found it useful too. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye for now.